The sound that broke Olivia's world wasn't a crash or a scream, but a low, rumbling laugh from the other side of an ornate, flower-decked lattice screen. She was hidden away in the bridal suite's private garden, a small sanctuary of white roses and ivy, meant for a moment of quiet reflection before she walked down the aisle. Her dress, a cascade of silk and antique lace, felt like a second skin. Her heart, just moments before, had been a hummingbird of joyous anticipation. Then she heard his voice, Julian's. The voice that had wooed her, soothed her, and promised her a forever. But the tone was all wrong. It was stripped of its warmth, coated in a slick, cruel amusement. "You're actually going through with it," said another voice, one she recognized as Caspian, Julian's best man and closest friend. "I never thought you'd take the bet this far." Bet. The word hung in the fragrant air, a poisoned dart. Julian laughed again, a sound so different from the one he used with her. "Of course I am. $1 million is $1 million. Besides, have you seen the way she looks at me?" The plain Jane librarian, utterly besotted, thinks I'm her Prince Charming. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. The terms were clear. I had to get her to the altar. Another hour, and I'm the richest man in our little club. "And then what?" Caspian asked, a hint of something. Was it admiration or disgust in his voice? "You'll be married to her." "Annulment," Julian said breezily, the word a slap. "A few months of playing the doting husband, then I'll find some insurmountable difference. She wasn't the woman I thought she was. She'll be heartbroken, of course. But she'll get over it. They always do. And I'll be $1 million richer. It's the easiest money I've ever made." The hummingbird in Olivia's chest died. In its place, something cold and heavy began to form. The garden, her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. The white roses seemed to mock her with their purity. Every loving word he'd ever spoken, every shared dream, every tender touch, it was all a performance. Transaction. She wasn't a beloved fiancé, she was a mark, a means to an end. A wave of nausea washed over her. Her first instinct was to tear off the veil, to storm out there and confront them, to expose him in front of everyone. To scream and cry and shatter the perfect illusion he had so carefully constructed around her. But as she clutched the cool marble of the bench, a different instinct, colder and sharper, took hold. What would happen if she did? He would be humiliated, yes. But he would spin it. He would paint her as hysterical, unstable. He and his wealthy, powerful friends would close ranks. He would lose the bet, but he would walk away, annoyed but unscathed. And she would be left with nothing but public pity and the wreckage of her heart. Well, that wasn't justice. That was a tantrum. Justice was colder. Justice was patient. In that frozen moment, the heartbroken librarian died, and a queen of a darker, more patient kingdom was born. She took a slow, deep breath, the air tasting of ash. She would not give him the satisfaction of a scene. She would not let him win by default. He wanted to get her to the altar. Fine. He wanted to play the doting husband for a few months. Perfect. He had laid out the terms of his game. Now she would play hers. She straightened her spine, the delicate lace of her dress suddenly feeling like armor. She smoothed a non-existent crease. He thought this was a bet he was about to win. He had no idea he was about to step into a trap of his own making, one she would spend every waking moment of their marriage constructing around him. He wanted to ruin her life for $1 million. She would dismantle his piece by piece, for the price of her broken heart. And she would do it with a smile on her face. When her father came to fetch her, he found her radiant, her eyes sparkling. "Are you ready, my love?" he whispered. Olivia smiled, a perfect, serene bridal smile. "I've never been more ready in my life," she said, her voice as steady as steel. She walked down that aisle, her gaze locked on the man waiting for her. He looked impossibly handsome, his smile brilliant, his eyes full of feigned adoration. The guests saw a bride floating towards her destiny. Julian saw his prize, his $1 million payday, just minutes away. But Olivia saw something else entirely. She saw a man whose life was already forfeit. As she placed her hand in his, the chill of her skin should have been a warning. He was a gambler who had just made the worst bet of his life. And he was about to lose everything. The honeymoon was a masterclass in deception. Julian whisked her away to a private villa in Santorini, a picture-perfect backdrop for his charade. He was attentive, charming, and endlessly romantic, playing the part of the besotted groom to perfection. Olivia, in turn, played the role he'd cast for her. The adoring, slightly overwhelmed bride, caught in a fairy tale she couldn't quite believe was real. She smiled at his jokes, blushed at his compliments, and feigned shyness during their moonlit dinners. But behind her soft, loving eyes, a chillingly precise calculation was taking place. She was a scholar of human nature, and Julian was now her most fascinating and most reviled subject. She studied him not as a wife studies a husband, but as a general studies an enemy. She learned his rhythms, his vanities, his insecurities. He craved admiration and abhorred being seen as second best. His confidence was a brittle shell, built on a foundation of inherited wealth and the sycophantic praise of his friends. He was careless with details, delegating anything he found tedious, assuming his charm would smooth over any discrepancies. His greatest weakness was his arrogance. He could not conceive of a world where he was not the smartest person in the room. While he lounged by the pool, she would plead a headache and retreat indoors. There she wasn't resting. She was working. With the quiet, methodical precision of a librarian cataloging archives, she began to map his life. She gained access to his unlocked laptop, his phone, his social media accounts. She read every email, every text message. She pieced together the architecture of his business dealings, the complex web of his social circle, and the dirty little secrets that held it all together. She discovered the bet was part of a long-standing tradition among his circle of friends, a group they called the Argonauts. They made cruel wagers on people's lives and careers with the casual indifference of gods playing with mortals. She learned the names of every member, their rivalries, their alliances. Financially, Julian was not as secure as he pretended. His family's company, a boutique investment firm called Thorn Capital, was propped up by a few aging, loyal clients. Julian's own ventures were flashy, high-risk, and often disastrous, secretly bailed out by his father's money. He was a peacock, all feathers and no substance. By the time they returned from their idyllic honeymoon, Olivia was no longer just a wronged woman. She was an intelligence operative with a complete dossier on her target. Her plan had 3 phases, designed to dismantle the pillars of his world. His social standing, his wealth, and finally, his emotional core. She began with the social. It was the easiest to attack and would serve to isolate him. Her first target was Caspian, the best man. Olivia knew from their texts that while Caspian participated in the bets, he harbored a deep-seated jealousy of Julian's effortless charisma and family money. She orchestrated a chance encounter with Caspian's ambitious girlfriend, Amelia, at a charity luncheon. Playing the part of the naive, sweet new wife, Olivia gushed about Julian's latest brilliant investment idea. A high-risk tech startup she knew from his emails was a complete dud. With wide-eyed innocence, she mentioned how Julian was planning to cut Caspian out of the deal, wanting all the glory for himself. He says Caspian is wonderful, but just a little too cautious for the big leagues, she confided sadly. The seed was planted. A week later, when Julian inevitably pitched the terrible idea to Caspian, his best man was no longer just cautious. He was suspicious and resentful. He declined to invest, and the ensuing argument, fueled by Amelia's whispers, created the first hairline fracture in their lifelong friendship. Next, she moved on to the Argonauts. She hosted a lavish dinner party, a perfect hostess in a perfect home. Throughout the evening, she moved between the guests, a whisper here, a shared confidence there. To one, she'd accidentally let slip a detail about a rival's secret business deal she'd read in Julian's emails. To another, she'd express concern over Julian's recent erratic behavior, hinting at a gambling problem he didn't have. She was a ghost in his machine, sowing discord and paranoia with a gentle smile and a refill of champagne. Julian, preening at the head of the table, was oblivious, seeing only his docile, perfect wife charming his friends. He had no idea she was methodically turning his pack of wolves against each other, with him as the eventual prey. Phase 2 was the financial assault. It required more patience, more precision. Her opportunity came when Julian's father, the stoic and formidable patriarch of Thorn Capital, announced his retirement, leaving Julian as the new CEO. It was the moment Julian had craved his entire life, and it was the beginning of his end. Olivia, the unassuming librarian, had spent the last few months taking online courses in advanced finance and corporate law. She began to offer Julian help with his work, positioning herself as a supportive wife interested in his world. "It's all so fascinating, darling," she'd say, organizing his files, proofreading his reports. He found it charming, a novelty. He gave her access to the company's internal servers, never imagining she could understand the complex data within. He started small. She identified a key client, a conservative, old-money family, and discovered through Julian's disorganized notes that their portfolio was dangerously over-leveraged in a volatile foreign market. Posing as a concerned wife, she called the family matriarch, a woman she'd befriended at a charity event. "I do hope I'm not overstepping," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured anxiety. "But Julian has been so stressed lately, and I overheard him on a call about the instability in the Argentinian market. He's been having nightmares. I'm just so worried about your family's investment." The matriarch, alarmed, launched an internal review. They pulled their 9-figure portfolio from Thorn Capital a week before the Argentinian market crashed. Julian was baffled, seeing it as a stroke of terrible luck. He never suspected the call had come from inside his own house. Her next move was more audacious. Julian was trying to land a major tech merger. Olivia, with her full access, knew his bid was weak and that a rival firm had a much stronger offer. She also knew the rival CEO had a weakness for contemporary art. On the night before the final bids were due, Olivia attended a gallery opening. She struck up a conversation with the rival CEO, and in the course of their chat, innocently mentioned a critical confidential detail about Thorn Capital's bid strategy, framing it as a tidbit she'd misunderstood from one of Julian's late-night calls. The next day, the rival firm adjusted their offer, perfectly countering Julian's. He lost the deal. It was a humiliating public failure, shaking the confidence of his investors and his own board. His reputation as a savvy deal-maker began to crumble. He grew paranoid and irritable, lashing out at his staff, further demoralizing the company. The final financial blow was a masterpiece of sabotage. She created a ghost in the company's accounting system, a tiny, almost invisible algorithm that began to siphon fractions of cents from thousands of transactions into an encrypted offshore account. It was a digital version of a classic scam, something a forensic accountant would eventually find, but not before it had done its damage. More importantly, the digital trail she laid didn't lead to her. It was a complex web that implicated Julian himself, mimicking the very patterns of embezzlement he had used to cover his own past mistakes. With his social circle in ruins and his company bleeding money, Julian was a king in a collapsing castle. He became a recluse, drinking heavily, his charm curdling into bitter resentment. All he had left was Olivia, his beautiful, loyal, ever-supportive wife. She was his rock, the one person who still looked at him with love and admiration. He clung to her, confiding his fears, his paranoia, his despair. He had no idea he was confessing to his executioner. The end came on their first wedding anniversary. Olivia had arranged a special dinner in their home. The table was set with the same china from their wedding, the room filled with white roses. She wore a simple silk dress, looking every bit the loving wife. Julian was a wreck, but he made an effort, bringing her a diamond necklace. As she fastened it, her hands cool on his skin, He looked at her with genuine, desperate gratitude. "Thank you, Liv," he whispered, "for sticking by me. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd be $1 million richer," she said, her voice calm and even. He froze. The color drained from his face. "What did you say?" She smiled, but for the first time in a year, it didn't reach her eyes. "The mask was off. The bet, Julian. The one you made with the Argonauts. To get the plain Jane librarian to the altar. Did you win?" He stared at her, his mind struggling to connect the loving woman before him with the cold fury in her eyes. How do you know about that?" "I was in the garden," she said simply. "On our wedding day. I heard everything. The confession, the shock, the dawning horror. It was all there on his face." He began to stammer, to deny, to explain. But Olivia held up a hand, silencing him. "Don't," she said. "It doesn't matter anymore. The game is over." She slid a sleek, leather-bound folder across the table. "This is for you." He opened it. Inside were printouts of bank statements from the offshore account, showing the embezzled funds from his own company. There were copies of emails and texts detailing his attempts to cover his disastrous business losses. There were sworn affidavits from former friends and colleagues, detailing his hubris and incompetence. And on top of it all, a single sheet of paper, a petition for divorce citing financial fraud and emotional cruelty. "Your friends are gone," she said, her voice a clinical summary of his ruin. "Caspian thinks you're a backstabbing egomaniac. Your so-called Argonauts have scattered. Your clients have left. The board is calling for your resignation, and there's a forensic audit beginning on Monday that will find everything. You've lost your company. You've lost your reputation. You've lost your friends." She stood up, walking to the fireplace. "You took my heart and you put a price on it. You thought my love was a commodity to be won in a bet." She picked up a small, framed photo from the mantelpiece, a picture of them on their wedding day, smiling. "You wanted a few months of playing house before you tossed me aside. Well, you got your wish." With a flick of her wrist, she tossed the photo into the fire. They watched the image of their smiling faces blacken and curl into ash. "You didn't win $1 million, Julian," she said, turning to face him one last time, her eyes as cold and clear as diamonds. "You lost everything. And the best part, you never even saw it coming." She walked out of the room without a backward glance, leaving him alone in the wreckage of the life he had so casually gambled away. The gilded cage was open, and she was finally free.